Wars cost money, and genocidal wars of aggression, well, they cost a lot of money. How's Russia paying for all of this death? Well, I'm former Navy SEAL Team 6 Squadron Leader Chuck Farr, and we're about to take a look at Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers, how they work, how they make money, and maybe even how to stop them. So join me on the Kyiv Post Point of Impact. Russia's oil and energy sector is key in financing Putin's war in Ukraine. Despite U.S., EU, and UN sanctions, Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers operates under a veil of secrecy to earn hard currency for the Kremlin. Flaunting sanctions from 2023 to 2024, there appears to have been a slight increase in Russian energy earnings. Figures rose from $188 billion to $189 billion year over year. This trade produces more than $500 million a day for Russia. Putin's international trade in oil and energy is predicated on a shadowy flotilla of around 600 tankers, with some reports putting that number as high as 1,300 vessels. These tankers are typically aging ships, often over 20 years old, bought, leased, or hired by shell companies or entities in non-sanctioning countries like the United Arab Emirates or the Marshall Islands. Russian shadow tankers fly flags of convenience from nations like Gabon, Panama, or the Cook Islands. They do so to avoid stringent regulations and oversight. Their crews are typically ad hoc and multinational, with officers, marine engineers, and crewmen from different nations. The performance and seamanship of these crews has been shown to be substandard, to say the least. Accidents, some of them serious, were to be expected, and they have occurred. But more on that later. The process of oil trading begins with contracting. Money is pocketed by using unseaworthy ships and discount crews. Put into the trade without necessary repairs to accommodations, hulls, engines, and navigation systems, the shady oil traders save the cost of maintenance from the price of doing business. Payment is facilitated through complex financial arrangements, cutouts, and shell corporations, often involving remuneration in currencies that are not subject to Western control, like the Indian rupee or the Chinese yuan. To bypass sanctions, offshore banks with strict secrecy laws are used, including those in the Caribbean, the West Indies, China, and even Switzerland. These steps make the transactions hard to detect and even more difficult to stop. Contracted vessels load at Russian ports such as Ust-Luga in the Baltic or Novorossiysk in the Russian Black Sea. The usual sea routes take these tankers through the Baltic and Black Seas to markets in Asia, particularly China, India, and Turkey, where demand for Russian oil remains high. To further evade sanctions, in mid-voyage, the oil is sometimes cross-decked by ship-to-ship transfers rather than at purpose-built tanker ports. This process occurs when two or more shadow fleet vessels rendezvous at a predetermined location, say, in the Mediterranean or the Aegean Sea. The territorial waters of Greece, a NATO member, are a frequent location for these cross-deck transfers. For Eastern markets, ship-to-ship transfers take place off the coast of Malaysia and Singapore. These at-sea pumping operations obscure the oil's origin, making it harder to trace back to Russia, and thus avoiding sanction enforcement. These transfers are also extremely risky to the environment and are often undertaken with zero adherence to international safety or environmental regulations. These unlawful operations in international waters have led to several environmental incidents. The worst so far occurred in the Sea of Azov. There, Russia is still attempting to mitigate a major oil spill that resulted from a cross-deck pumping operation involving two oil-carrying vessels caught in a sudden storm. More accidents are frankly inevitable. The U.S. and international sanctions target not only the vessels, but also the entities involved in their operation. With the U.S. Treasury announcing sanctions on over 180 ships in early 2025. However, these measures have not entirely halted the trade. Instead, they've only driven up the costs and the risks. Other Shadow Fleet tricks include captains turning off their ship's automatic identification systems to hide their movements and using false or deliberately altered manifests. Ships' owners also play fast and loose, renaming vessels mid-voyage and engaging in flag hopping, where ships change their national registration frequently to dodge sanctions. The Shadow Fleet has become a significant revenue source for Russia, with estimates suggesting that it brings in about $196 billion per year. Analysts estimate that a significant portion, possibly up to 40% of these revenues, could be funneled into funding Russia's military adventures in Ukraine. Shady shell corporations, unlicensed and underqualified officers, crew and engineers, poor seamanship, badly and under-maintained equipment, and zero insurance. What could possibly go wrong? A lot. On 19 July of last year, the Russian shadow tanker Series 1 collided with another vessel, the Hafnia Nile, in an anchorage off the coast of Malaysia. A lapse in seamanship that left both vessels on fire as oil spilled from their hulls. The fires were eventually extinguished and the oil spill contained, but it's only a matter of time until another one of Russia's decrepit oil trucks comes to grief. The continued activities of Putin's shadow fleet have overlapped deliberate damage to undersea power, telecommunications, and pipelines in the Baltic. But Russia itself has not been immune from several unfortunate occurrences. On 9 February, at Ust-Luga port, northwest Russia, near St. Petersburg, the tanker Koala, carrying 130,000 barrels of oil, was docked when it experienced multiple explosions in its engine room. As the engineering spaces flooded, Koala lost electrical power. As she could no longer control the flooding, the ship settled at pierside and the crew was evacuated. Koala is presently sunk at pierside in Ust-Luga. There are indications that the explosions might not have been accidental. The term man-made incident was used in some reports, suggesting sabotage. Well, Koala is not the only vessel to be damaged as a result of direct action by unknown parties. The sinking of the Russian cargo ship Ursa Major on December 24, 2024, has also attracted claims of sabotage. Ursa Major was under U.S. sanctions since 2022 due to its owner's involvement in transporting military cargo to support Russia's operations in Syria. Underway in the Western Mediterranean last Christmas, Ursa Major sank after a detonation in its engine room. This explosion led to the ship taking a heavy lift to starboard before it eventually sank at approximately 0120 GMT the following day. The ship's owner, Oberon Logistica, a company linked to the Russian Defense Ministry, claimed the incident was an act of terrorism involving 3 consecutive explosions on the starboard side of the ship. Well, this accusation certainly suggests sabotage, but no specific perpetrators were named by the company or Russian authorities. At the time of sinking, Ursa Major was carrying heavy equipment, including cranes for the port of Vladivostok and hatch covers for a Russian nuclear icebreaker presently under construction. With Ursa Major's history and the current geopolitical tensions, particularly involving sanctions against Russia related to the Ukraine conflict, there's considerable speculation about whether the sinking of that ship was a deliberate act of sabotage. The true cause of the explosions and subsequent sinking will remain contentious until definitive evidence is uncovered. Concrete steps are being taken against Putin's ghost fleet. Following the latest sabotage of the Estlink 2 power cable connecting Finland and Estonia, the Shadow Fleet tanker Eagle S was boarded by fast-roping commandos from the Finnish National Police. Though the captain and crew claimed the cutting of the cable was accidental, the Finns were having none of it. Eagle S was directed to a port off Helsinki and seized. NATO patience is running out. Eagle S was the first anchor dragger to face direct consequences. Finnish authorities have announced their intention to sell both the ship and its cargo of oil to pay for repair of the undersea cable. This response raises the ante of any other Russian shadow up to no good in the Baltic. This sort of action and a much firmer enforcement of sanctions are the only way to bring Putin's shadow tankers to bay. One of the early, immediate, and obvious consequences of Putin's invasion was the rapid ascension of Finland and Sweden to NATO. The result of this was to make the Baltic a NATO lake. A bit more than half of Russia's shadow fleet must transition the Baltic. The other half uses the Novorossiya terminus in the Black Sea with a single access point through the Bosphorus. For these reasons alone, Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a geopolitical blunder of the first order. The incidents that sank the Koala and Ursa Major point to major Russian vulnerabilities, not only to unconventional warfare, but conventional surface warfare as well. In the event of more generalized hostilities, it would be exceedingly dangerous for ships of any nation to continue to trade with Russia, as commerce could be easily interdicted. These two choke points, the Bosphorus and the Danish Straits, could be easily closed. Many of these tankers lack proper Western insurance, making them high risk for port entries in countries adhering to sanctions. And a growing list of countries and ports are refusing entry to Putin's ghost fleet. With stricter sanction enforcement, and with the recent example of Finland seizing the Eagle S, at the time of this writing, as many as 60 Russian shadow tankers have been forced to anchor in ports around the world. When anchored, these ships can't carry out their principal duty, financing Putin's war machine. Hey, for the Kyiv Post, I'm Navy SEAL Chuck Farr, and I'm going to join you again at the point of impact.